Great.
Yeah, so you'll have to set that back up. I'm gonna keep moving forward while you do that, Kathleen. And then if I need to like go over the homework again with you, I can.
Cool.
Just let me know.
Record it.
Yeah, that's fine. So we've got our app, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and CD into it. Clicky friends. And then if you've enabled code on the command line, you can just type code, period, and it'll open everything from the current directory down in VS Code. If you don't, then you'll just have to open VS Code and open your folder manually. Does anybody not have code enabled on the terminal? Cool. All right, so let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to delete app CSS, apptest.js, and this logo SVG. And those just kind of all belong for the default Create React app. But once if you choose to do that, when you go into app.js, you need to make sure to delete these two top lines because those no longer exist. And then I'm just going to go in here and get rid of everything between the div with the class name app and its closing portion. And so to start out, I'm just going to put a nice little H1 here. And it's going to say, hello world. I'm going to flip back over to my terminal. I'm going to type yarn start. For those of you not using yarn, you can just type npm start. And I'm just going to make sure my app comes up. Cool. And then I'm going to go back and get started. So anybody have any questions? Or trouble just getting...
What's the difference between npm and yarn?
They're virtually the same thing. They're just, think of it as like two different brands.
Okay.
Yeah.
What have you done so far?
I've done Create React app, and then I just removed files I didn't need. And
the one reason that a lot of us like to use Yarn is because Yarn is made by the same people who made React. So
True.
There's a little bit of a tighter integration, but it'll work the other way too.
What were the three things you deleted? I only deleted two.
Sorry.
I deleted, there was a file called app.test, I believe.
Got it.
I deleted the app CSS
Oh, okay.
and the logo. All right, so we know that our app's running in the background now, and we know that we need to create a clicky thing, right? So totally up to you guys what you want to do, but I start out with, go back to my H1, and I'm just going to put my title, Clicky Friends, and I'm just going to put a simple p tag and click all the friends, no duplicates, to win. I'm just going to save that, and I like to go back and forth and just kind of check as I go, since it renders on the fly. So, what do we know if we think back to the SpongeBob example, and we think to our requirements for the homework, since it said we have to have images and whatnot, what could we just put here to get started?
A card.
We could do a card. We can go even simpler than that. Did somebody, I think you said it?
Placeholders?
Placeholder images?
Images, yeah.
Yeah. So we know that we're going to have images, but let's just go ahead and put one image in to get it on the page. So image source equals, and we can just set it to HTTPS via placeholder.com, and I'm just going to say 100 by 100 there. I'm going to go ahead and put an alt, and just say placeholder, and then I'm going to close off the image. I'm going to save it. I'm just going to go look at my page, and it's broken. Is it via.placeholder? Yes. Okay. So via.placeholder.com, and then slash, and if you just put one number after the slash, it makes it a square. So now I see I have an image, right? So how many images do we need? Doesn't say, we just need plural, right? A bunch. So I could copy this. I'll just say 5 images. And now I've got 5 images here, right? But we're using React, and we have these 5 things. And what is a method that we've called in class? And again, think back to the SpongeBob, where we were able to render the same thing over and over, but with different things inside of it.
The constructor functions?
So we stored all the SpongeBob information, like each of the friends' information. We stored it in a what type of variable?
JSON file.
Yeah, but what type of variable was it in?
Just an array.
Mm-hmm. And what method can we call in the array to iterate over it? Map. And map returns,
An array.
right? So what we talked about, we need an array, right? And we talked about we're going to map over it. So at this point, with React, I'm thinking, okay, in order to have an array, and I want to map over it, and I'm thinking a little bit ahead of like, I need the array to change every time they click. So that's probably going to be stored in state, and every time I change it, it'll re-render. So I'm going to go ahead and go up here, and I'm just going to import component from React. And I'm just going to go ahead and change this to be class app extends component. I'm going to add in the render method. I'll do this formatted. Cool. So my app is still working. It's now a class, extends component. It's got the render method, and now I can introduce state. And I can just say state equals, and for now I'm going to put friends, and I'm going to work with an array, and I want to have a sample of just 3 things in it. I don't really care what they are. I just want 3 things in it, so I have 3 instances or indexes in my array. And now I'm just going to delete this. So how do I write JSX in my return down here? What do I need to wrap it in?
Curly brackets.
Yeah. And does anybody have a guess or know what we're going to do here? We just talked about it.
You have a map
Uh-huh.
over the friends array.
Okay. And so how do I reference the friends array?
Just state that friends.
Perfect. Dot state dot friends. Dot, yeah, perfect. So when I'm mapping over something, you're using the map to iterate over every instance of it. So whatever you're mapping over is plural. So this is just my preference, but we're mapping over friends. So for the argument, I just like to call it the singular version of whatever I mapped over. And so I'm going to return something, and we can just grab this image here, and we can just say return that image, right? So if I go over here, who thinks that we're going to see 3 images, and who thinks we're going to see 1? So 3 images, raise your hand. 1 image. So we've got 3. And the reason we have 3 is because we said map over this .state.friends, and how many indexes are in that array?
3.
There's 3. So it mapped over it. We didn't utilize any data from the array. We just said for each instance of the array, I want you to place an image, right? And this could be a component that you imported and you created. You could have created a card component and it have a bunch of stuff in it, and then you could have just put it right here. And that's what we did for SpongeBob, right? We had a card component, we imported it in, we said map over something, and for every time, put this card component, and we passed in props to that component that it could utilize to populate. But in this case, very simple. We're just saying, give us an image. So now, we need the images to actually have URLs. So I would go out and I'd go find images I wanted to use online, you know, whatever theme you're going to do, doesn't matter. And I'd go download those and save them. I am going to grab this folder. So I have already downloaded some images, and I'm just going to bring that folder in. And now you see that I have my folder of GIFs, so you can use images, whatever you want. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to the public folder real quick. Because some of you might, how we were doing previously, you might be kind of like, oh, I need to put all my assets in my public folder so they're accessible everywhere. But if we were to, let's just say we wanted to require something here. So we'll just do it here. So for each friend, I'm going to make them, and this is again personal preference for now, I'm going to make them objects, and they're going to have a property called GIF, and it's going to be the URL, or the relative path rather. So with React, you can't just say like, you know, oh, it's going to be here, and like point to some path, right? You have to actually say require, and then you can go in here, and now I can see that it's trying to autofill it for me. So if I go up a file, and I go to public /GIFs/ and I just say, let's see what are they called? So char.gif. And we can even just take public off. Right? That's how we're used to seeing it. When I go to my app now, it says you attempted to import something which falls outside of the project source directory. So React does not want you, once you're in your source file, doesn't want you ever going outside of that source folder to get stuff to bring in. Anything that you want to use in the source folder needs to be in the source folder. So I'm just going to move this back to source. Now I'm just going to change this to one dot. Oops. I'm going to say in the same directory, just go to the GIFs folder and grab that. Okay. So now I have a friends array with one object, so one instance in the array, has a property of GIF, and we've set it, the value of it, to require and the relative path. So for this image, if I wanted to get the image out of my GIF folder, what would I need to put as the source? So you're on the right track, but it's not going to be this .state.gif because .gif in state does not exist. It would be this .state.friends.gif, but we're also not going to do that because in map, yeah, and so for each instance of map, where is the instance stored? Friend. So the instance is stored right here, this argument. So every time it maps, we get the singular, right? So for the first index, that index zeroes on this argument, friend. So if friend is essentially, and actually I'm just going to go down here. So for the first instance that comes in, friend would equal object, GIF, and then some value, right? So if that's what that is, how do I get the value out of friend? So if we look at lines 28 and 30, it's saying friend is what? It's a type of variable. Object. Yeah. So if it's an object, how do I get the gift value? So we don't need the parentheses, but we do need curly braces because we're writing what? Java.
JavaScript.
Yep. JavaScript extension in React here. And so we can just say friend dot give. And that's going to give us the value out of there. So if we alt tab, back over, there's Charmander. Does anybody have any questions on that?
So the reason we could do just friend.gif is because it's all in that function anyway, instead of doing the function and pulling it somewhere else.
So the reason we can do it is because when we map over an array, this one argument, that singular, is each instance of the array, right?
Right.
Right now it literally only has one instance, index 0. And index 0 at this moment is coming into friend. And so this right here is just like saying, essentially,
Doesn't matter.
this dot state dot friends 0 dot give, right? And then if I had more instances in this, every time it comes back into the next argument, the next time it would be dot 1, dot 2. So they just keep pumping in these. But because we're mapping over it, it's giving us this argument that we can reference that represents each index as it enters it.
Okay.
Isn't Matt creating a new array, and the new array is friend?
So map returns something, yes.
I knew it.
Yeah. And so we're just mapping over the array and we're returning this new thing. Yes. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more instances. I'm just going to open my folder so I can see my images. For each one, GIF require dot slash GIFs slash I'm gonna say, so now I have a bunch of GIFs on here, right? So now we can see that it's mapping over the whole thing. And each time, the first one, so index 0, get the GIF, index 1, index 2, 3, 4, and each time it just grabs the reference.gif. Questions? All right.
Can you put the 100 on the back of that, or no? Sorry, with the curly brackets
100.
for the size,
No, that was just in reference to
the one.
the placeholder site.
Okay.
So that's a good question. So you want, these are all different sizes, huge, small. So we can fix that real quick. I'm just gonna come down here. I'm gonna create a div. Actually, I'm just gonna say div dot friendzone. And I'm just gonna move this into that div. And we'll format. So I have a class called friendzone, right? So I'm just gonna go out here and I'm gonna make a new file and I'm gonna call it mystyles.css. And in here, I'm gonna put friendzone and I'm gonna put image and I'm gonna say height 100 pixels, and actually no, we'll say 200 pixels, and width 200 pixels. And then if I save that, what do I need to do up here? so that I can
Import.
actually see my styles.
Import your
Import.
CSS file.
Okay, and how do I do that?
You would say import,
Yes.
would you just name that whatever?
Yeah, I named it my styles.
Yeah, and then from, where you had it, it would be,
Myself.
Like that?
yeah, or, here's wherever the path was to it.
Yeah, it's in the same folder.
Right.
So,
Okay.
but now if I save that, it did work. That's interesting. Huh.
Why did you think that wasn't gonna work?
I didn't think it was going to work because you're importing it into a variable.
Oh, right.
And so now you're going to have, this variable is going to be highlighted and React's just going to tell you, hey, you never used it,
Right.
right? So we can just say,
Just import the file.
yeah, just import mystyles.css. And we still get the same thing. That's actually really interesting to know. Yeah, so now we got that.
React is so smart.
Yeah. So we've got our friends on the page. What else do we need to do? What's the name of the game?
Clicky friends. So
Yeah. So what would you think we need to implement? Some sort
click
of...
handler.
Sure. All right. And what does our click handler need to do?
Reshuffle the array.
And keep track, just know which one you clicked on,
Okay.
so there's no duplication.
Yeah, those are both right. So we
You have
can
to put
shuffle,
it in
and we
a
need to
row.
keep track. Currently, we have nothing to keep track of, right? So what would be something that we could keep track of, that we could
Yeah.
create?
Couldn't you keep track of friends and see once it clicked, it would mark off that index?
The index, sure. But if we're gonna shuffle it, the indexes are gonna change. So if we click Pikachu and he's index 0, we shuffle it, and then we click Charizard at index 0, and it looks at index 0 and says, oh, you already clicked this one, sorry, you lost. So you're very close. If we think of like a database, each thing has a unique identifier, and often it is the ID. So we can give each thing an ID, and we can just say 1, 2, 3. And there's plenty of ways to do stuff like this. Again, I'm just showing you guys a basic example so that y'all can take it and build it out from there. So now, I've got this, and if we go and inspect, we're probably gonna have an error or a warning. And it talks about that key. And the key needs to be unique, so why don't we just go ahead and use key equals, we'll just say friend.id. And now that's going. Cool? Because we know the ID is gonna be unique. We know that it's not gonna change no matter what index they're in. It's gonna go with that friend. And then we can start writing our own click. So we'll just say onClick equals arrow function. And you said we want to track the ID, right? So we'll give it an argument that takes an ID so it can track it. And what do I need to give my, we'll say you can click on the image. So what do I need to give my image down here?
Is that one?
Like what do I need to add to my image here
A value?
so that I can use my click
An ID?
in the image? Not quite, because we don't have to write JavaScript that grabs the ID. On click. Yep.
Oh,
On click equals. And if we set it to this dot on click, right? And let's just go in here and say console.log. I've been clicked. If we go look, it just console logged it 5 times and I didn't click anything. right?
Prevent default.
So we don't have to have prevent default, but we can. So right now, onClick is just defined to the invoked, right? Because it's got this on here. The invoked version of the function. So we could try just taking it off. Now it's not there. Now I click it, and it works, right? So you just want to make sure.
The ID.
Can you wanna do that one more time, just so I can see exactly what you did?
Yep. So when it had parentheses, right? If we think back to JavaScript, how did we call our functions when we wanted it to run? We would
Parentheses
write-
capture.
Yeah. So when I'm assigning this, I'm saying onClick equals the invoked version of this onClick. So every time it creates that image, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, it went ahead and invoked it. And we don't want it to be invoked, so we just set it to the function without the parent. And the onClick is gonna invoke it. So now when I click the images, they all work how they should.
So you get a lot of clicks.
Can I see your CSS code?
Yeah. Just height and width.
That's what I tried.
So what this does, so I grabbed my class,
Oh, I see.
and then because I had a space and then another element, this is just saying any image that is a descendant of friend zone. So any image that is inside friend zone anywhere is gonna take this height and width. Cool.
Would you Slack me your app.js request? Just all of it, because mine's not happy.
So Jeff said I can't send it out.
Ah, cool, alright, cool.
Yeah,
Don't
I'm
worry about
sorry.
it. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So, so now you did say, I think Katya, you brought this up, that onClick, we gave it the argument ID, right? Well, how can we get that ID in there if we can't put the parentheses on it? So we need it to have, right? We need to have it.
Did you use an arrow function?
Yeah. So, it's still working. And what if I just console log? So now they're all coming up automatically. Jeremiah brought up to use an arrow function. How are we going to use the arrow function?
Can't remember, we kind of did this just in class
Yep.
just a minute ago. But you would, like you would return that in the arrow function? Is that what?
Yeah.
Essentially?
So
Okay.
you would write an anonymous arrow function. So now onClick is set to a function that when clicked will fire off this function. So now we're back to no console logs on creation, but when we click, we now see our IDs. So if you're running into this and it's auto firing your function, you can solve it by just putting an anonymous function set to the function you want to be invoked. Okay. So now we got that part. We're passing our ID into the onClick. So now we would compare that ID to something. Yeah.
Can you go up to the top real quick?
Yeah, that's where we're headed anyways. So now in my state, I need to keep track of what?
ID.
That has been?
Clicked.
Yes. So,
Boolean.
what?
I just like saying Boolean.
Boolean?
I made a flag on each of them called clicked, if it's either true or false.
Okay, you can do that. You could also do let's see. So what you did is you gave all of them a Boolean property.
They all start off clicked false.
So what if you had 1,000 images and you had to go right in here 1,000 times, is clicked, false, is clicked, false, is clicked, false.
So you're suggesting there's a better way.
Maybe. I mean, you could definitely do that. You would have to generate each instance though from like I mean, even this like ID thing, right? It's the same thing. If we had 1,000, I don't want to have to go in there and write 1,000 times ID equals 1, 2, 3, 4. So I don't have to repeat this one. I'm going to say clicked friends. That's what I'm going to call it. It's going to be a blank array. So the initial state, that's what this is called right here when you're defining the state. This is the initial state of this component. Clicked friends is empty. So every time I click, I want to check if the ID's been clicked. So, and at the end of the click, whatever was clicked, I want to say, and I'm actually going to do some object deconstruction. So let clicked friends equal this dot state. Any questions on that? Or if I remember that from the other day. So then, down here at the bottom, when everything's all said and done, I want to do clicked friends, and how can I get this in the array?
Push.
Dot push. We're going to push that ID that represents the friend we clicked. Cool? So if I always rendered this dot, we'll just do this dot state. So we can see on the initial rendering, I've got clicked friends and friends, right? Now when I click a friend, oh, it's not working anymore. So it's not working because we're not actually changing the state. So it's not re-rendering anything, right? So how do I change the state? What do I need to do down here?
Set state.
Set state? Very close. What comes before set state?
Oh, this.
That's a function that takes an object, which is our state. And I'm going to set clicked friends. And I can get away with just doing this because my variable that I'm referencing here is the same name as my property. And we talked about the other day, ES6 is smart enough to know that if you do this, both sides, key and value, match. So now, if I save that, I've got that. Oh, now I've got another one. And it says clicked, and it's got my array. And I can do another one. Now I've got two. And I've clicked 2 and 4, okay? So now I can officially check if, and what am I checking?
Clicks.
If we've clicked something, so how am I gonna check that? What's that? Yeah.
You would check if click friends is equal to true, right?
Not if it's equal to true. If it's an array, and we're always pushing into that array, what do we need to find out about that array? If it what?
If it's been pushed into there.
Uh-huh. And so we can call clicked friends dot what?
Find.
There are two things on the screen right now that we can use.
Filter. Can't you
You could filter, but filter's going to return a value, another array. So we could use includes, which is what I like to do because it just returns true or false. Or we could use index of, and that's going to return either the index of it or -1 to say it doesn't exist. So I'm going to use includes because I just want the yes or no. I don't care if it's at index 4 or 2 or 1. So clicked friends dot includes ID, which we've got from our argument up here. So if it includes, then I to just say you lost. Alright. Otherwise, move that in here. And every time they click, maybe we could keep track of their score. So we can just add that up here. Score starts at 0. And then we can add that right here, because we're just pulling it out of this dot state. So if you lose, we want score to equal what?
0.
0. And if you successfully click something, what would we want to happen to score?
Go up 1 plus 1.
Go up +1. And so we can just say plus plus, right?
I thought you could do that.
So we've changed these values, and we console log you lost. And if you successfully clicked a different one, we're pushing the ID into our array to keep track of it. What would we want to happen to that array if you lost?
Clear it.
Clear. And we do this so that down the road, when we start over with an empty array, and we don't just start over with a score of 0, an array full of everything we just clicked. So clicked friends equals blank array. And then when I'm done with either one of these, if or else, I come out of them and I do this dot set state, and I'm going to set the state of clicked friends, score, and I think that's it for now. So we're logging state. We've now got clicked friends, score, right? Click 1, clicked friends, scores 1, 2, 4, 2, click the same one, you lost, and we're back to our original state, right?
But they're
And-
still not moving.
Say what?
They're not moving.
They're not moving. You are right.
Aren't you moving?
Okay, so that was something else that we need to address, and that's our shuffling. So, to shuffle, does anybody remember a good way to shuffle from earlier in the cohort?
I mean, you just generate a random number between 0 and the array. That way.
Yes, however,
You wouldn't want to get the same number twice though, since how?
correct. That is right. So I'm going to copy what I wrote earlier for the sake of time here, and then we can walk through it. Where would we want to do it? We want to shuffle the array if they what?
Else.
When you
Yeah.
click,
The first one, if they don't lose, right?
like every time you click though,
Yeah, so if they don't lose, we want to shuffle it. We could also shuffle it if they lost, right? You lose, shuffle it, start over. So we could just put it down here so that it happens outside of the if. And let me fix these. Friend count equals friends. Oh, okay. So yeah. So now I need to bring friends in, which is from this dot state, right? Friends. And now all my errors are gone because I was referencing them. So I am down here. Let's just format this. So I grabbed friends from state, and then I created length so that every time I don't have to calculate length, I just calculate it one time on the click. And then I have friend selected that I initialized. It has no value right now. And I have temp for temporary, and I just initialized that variable, no value, okay? So while friend count is greater than 0, and friend count is set to the length, so we're starting at the end of the array. So in this case, the length is 5, so friend count is 5. while friend count is greater than 0, we're going to set friend selected to a random friend. I'm just grabbing one in there, okay? And then we're going down on friend count to 4, just to go ahead and get rid of it, and this could actually be down at the end, right? Then we're setting our temporary placeholder to whatever friend we just started at. Okay, so this is the friend at index 5. Oh, never mind. This does have to be up here. Does anybody know why it wouldn't work if we moved friend count down to the bottom? So what? So it's not asynchronous. So what does friend count start as? If the length of our array is 5, what is and our friend count is set to the length of the array, starts at 5. Okay. But what is the last index of that array? 4. Yes. So if we did not decrement friend count, then as soon as we tried to index it, we would get an error and it would be undefined, right? And we would never actually make it to our very first friend. So we decrement so that we can get the index here, okay? And so we temporarily place it here. And then we set the index that we just moved to a temporary holding area to this, which is our random friend, right? We randomly select somebody. And then we could select itself, right? We're just shuffling, and it's possible that it goes right back where it was. And then we put from our temporary. So this, I guess if we were to draw it out, this would look something like,
There's just like.
are they
those.
white? Okay. There we go.
There's an arrow above too, it's just white.
Yeah. I'll just use these. So this is all that's happening. So this could be our index, right? That's temporary. And this is our random one. So we're taking our index, we're putting it in a holder, and then we're placing this into the index that we were on, and then we're taking the temporary and putting it in the one we just moved. And so they're just swapping places. That's it. But you can't do a direct swap, so you have to make a copy and then override the original and take the copy and override what was.
And it could stay in the same place, because if it was the same one, and then the next one would be somewhere different or move.
Yes. Yep. And that's how you would shuffle. Yeah, I can do that. Oh no, my code is gone.
Can I see your on-click line again? I've got a syntax error.
Yeah, let me get it back real quick. There we go.
Yeah, we can change
You talking about this line, John?
No, it's roughly number 80. It's the
Under
actual-
the render.
Yeah.
Yeah. So right here, yeah.
It's like,
It needs to be this
I
on
can't see
click.
the red text very well. I think is the problem.
So this is just an image?
Image almost like equals curly brace.
Yep.
And then
What's your error?
It's just, it highlights the beginning of the next div, like it's expecting a comma or something.
Did you close your curly brace after IG?
Yes.
Okay.
Why would it want a comma there?
Max, do you mind taking a quick look
Sure.
at
Oh, I didn't close my, this dot state curly brace, I think is what it is. Still broken.
Okay. So we shuffle, and percent core, score, clicked.
Then you could win.
And we are what were we just changing the here?
What do you mean what we changing?
What array are we working with? Friends. We're working with the friends array, which we got directly from state in the variable right here, where we deconstructed it. We manipulated that array with shuffling, so we shuffled it. But now we need to do what with our array?
Display the shuffles.
Render it,
Well, if we change something with React, it doesn't know unless it was changed in what causes a re-render? When the change happens to what? State. So when you change your state, React sees that and it'll re-render the page. Right? So if we want to see the shuffled array, where do we need to put it? What do we need to do?
Reset state.
Yeah. So we can just add it right in here, friends. And so now it just
Wait, you never win.
But I never what?
You never win. You don't have anything if you win.
Correct, yes, you're correct. It's actually really weird that that's working, and I'm not running it.
Mm-hmm. It seems like it's running itself.
Okay. Yeah. So now, since John likes to use booleans, we're going to add a boolean. And we want to know if they win or lose, right? So we will just say round end for now. And we'll set it initially to false because it's not over. And down here, I don't want to render the images if they lose, right? I want to tell them, hey, you lost. So what could I do here? What do we call it when we render two different things?
Conditional rendering?
Yeah, conditional rendering. So I want to do some conditional rendering here. And it's just if they lost, I'm going to render something, and if the round is still going, so if the round has not ended, then we're going to return this map. So I could grab from state, we called it round end, I believe. Yeah. So this dot state dot round end, which is true or false, right? And if I'm checking that, and I want to use a